Welcome, listeners, to our podcast, Understanding the Practicalities of a Circular Economy. My name's Dr. Darren Perrin. I'm a director in Roland Berger, and I'm joined here today by two partners from our Germany office, Hannah and Christian. Welcome. Introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Christian Boehler. I'm based in Munich, which is in the south of Germany. And I'm advising clients since 17 years in the area of sustainability and beyond, circular economy and decarbonization topics, especially for R&D departments and product development. And my client base is largely in the industrial space and automotive.
Welcome also from my end. My name is Hannah. I'm also a partner with Roland Berger in Germany. I focus on both circular economy and decarbonization across industries, which also means I see a whole wide range of applications of the circular economy. And I'm really happy to be here at COP28 in Dubai.
So, this is a podcast about circular economy, so we've obviously talking about circular economy, but Christian, start us off. What is a circular economy?
Let me maybe first start off explaining what it's not. In the past, most of our economies, of our business and our life has been a linear economy, right? So something starts with raw materials, excavated somewhere, and then made into products, sold and then used, and after use, often just disposed. Thrown away, maybe to landfill. And this is where circular economy actually gets started. So we want to close this loop, bring the waste back into something useful by, for example, just using products longer by repairing or recycling them and making sure that we really make the most out of the things we excavated at the beginning.
Wow. Chris, that sounds complicated. Hannah, how can we simplify that in one sentence?
Okay, simplifying is always, of course, more difficult than the longer description, but let me give it a try. Right now, we're extracting a lot of resources from Earth. So in one sentence, circular economy is about closing the loop, not extracting resources from Earth. Right now, we are living as if we had 2.5 planets available for use, which obviously we do not have. So we need to stay within our planetary boundaries. But let me also ask you a question, Darren. There is so many circular economy frameworks out there. What are the big differences and which one do you prefer?
Really interesting question, Hannah. And as you know, worked on many circular economy projects, on strategies, on policies and so on. And there's always references to many different frameworks. And I don't think we've got a long enough podcast to go through the detail of all of them. But what I would say is the commonality between them is three areas, I would say. We've got the production, so very much around avoiding generation, so whether that be waste, whether that be water, whether that be energy, it's all very much around the production. So how can we avoid that within the first place? The second then focuses very much on management. So how do we actually, once something is generated, how do we keep it in the cycle for as long as possible? So paper, for example, you produce the paper, how do we then keep it in the system and keep recycling the paper and going round and round and round and keeping it as long as possible? Inevitably, material falls out of that management cycle and then it's leaked out, and that's then wastage. And as it leaks out, the third area is then around, okay, from that leakage, how can we maximize the value as it's then leaked out of that system? So energy from waste would be an example of that, is rather than the waste going to landfill because it's not been recycled, you then recover energy from that. So Christian, why do you think a circular economy is so important?
First of all, because it's the key lever for decarbonization. I would almost go so far to say that decarbonization and circular economy never can be optimized in an isolated way. It always speaks to each other. But the good thing about circular economy is that it is so much more than only decarbonization. It's also about solving the biodiversity crisis. It's about avoiding pollution. It's about matching and meeting human rights all along the value chain. And this is actually the beauty, Darren, of circular economy, that it ticks so many boxes in the space of sustainability. Darren, at COP, we hear a lot about circular carbon economy. So there's an extra word in the circular economy. What is that?
Yeah, it's a conversation that many people have, right? I guess that they are subtly different. So circular carbon economy is very much focused on carbon. So the generation of carbon, trying to reduce the amount of carbon generated, looking at alternative models so you don't need to generate carbon, and then you capture it, recycle, recirculate it, trying to avoid the leakage into the emissions into air. Circular economy is, to me, a lot broader than the circular carbon economy, because it's very much around looking at materials and products and then avoiding them to be ultimately leakage into land, air or sea. So circular economy is a lot broader and a lot more encompassing. The circular carbon economy focuses very specifically on the carbon. I think it's also probably worth mentioning as well, within a broader circular economy, you're talking around technical cycles and biological cycles. So technical cycles are seen as bad, and you're trying to keep it in the loop as much as possible, starting with reuse, remanufacture, etc., working your way out. Whereas the biological circles is all about regeneration, so about actually almost in some ways encouraging that, so that's back into the soils, back into regenerating our natural capital. So when we talk around the circular economy, that's very much around all of that encompassing, not specifically on one area. So Christian, let's get a little bit more into the detail. Let's challenge this a bit, I guess. Is circular economy just a buzzword? I've heard that mentioned a few times at COP. Are we really just rethinking what was previously resource efficiency?
Yeah, Darren, it's right. Many people use it as a buzzword nowadays, all over the place, all over in the news, and a lot in marketing, of course. But circular economy really has its justification as a concept. If it's applied properly in the business context, and if the whole idea of a company and the whole structure of a company is organized along the idea of circular economy. And that's why I would not say it's just resource efficiency 2.0, it's much more than that.
So Hannah, what's the key principles of a circular economy?
I think, Darren, you touched upon the principles earlier already. So for me, it's three, I would say, main phases of the circular economy. It starts very early on, what most people forget. So in the design phase, let's say we design a product, we need to very early on think about how we design the product so that it's suitable for the circular economy. We need to reduce materials. We need to rethink ownership, for example. And very important, we also need to keep out any harmful substances, for example. So that's the first phase. The second phase is then about the use phase. So once the product is in use, we need to keep it in the circles or in use as long as possible. And that can be through repair, for example, through reuse, remanufacturing, refurbishment, and always as the last option, recycling, because recycling has lost most of the value already of the original product. Of course, that is all very desirable, but in the end, we will never be without waste. And that's when we come to the third stage. Whenever we have waste, it's about to ensure that we use or maximize the value out of waste, for example, through waste to X. What I just described is obviously the desired state and not where we are at the moment. And when it comes to our current state, we often hear the word circularity gap. Darren, what do we actually mean by circularity gap?
Yeah, I guess like anything, a gap is a distance from something that we're missing. So true circularity is 100% of everything that's generated gets recirculated back into the economy. And the circularity gap is essentially how far are we from that 100%. So in simple terms, that's what the circularity gap is.
Darren, we're here at COP28, and of course our main objective at COP28 is to decarbonize, to reach the targets of the Paris Agreement, to become net zero. What does the circular economy do in order to help to achieve these targets?
No, it's a really good question. And for the first time in COP history, waste management, circular economy is on the agenda, as it rightly should be and should have been, to be frank, a long time ago. You've talked there about trying to decarbonize energy. The way in which you achieve to get anything to zero is around consumption, is using less energy, using less water, using less products. And that's what circular economy, as we've just discussed, is about, is looking at that avoidance, looking at that reducing down in terms of production. if you think about it, waste management and circular economy is all about looking at those materials. All of those if we make less materials, we use less energy. It's not about using renewable energy, it's about using less energy. So the more we can focus on materials management, then we will then have wider benefits, not only just in terms of energy, but the associated impacts. The less materials there are, there's less materials being transported. That means there's less air pollution, there's less materials moving around. It means there's less in terms of transport and distribution. So there's multiple impacts in terms of on our biodiversity, on our natural capital, on the quality of our water, so on and so on. And the first order, second order, third order impacts are significant. So to me, materials management is right at the center of solving this problem. And when you look at the waste industry and the circular economy, that's all around how do we manage materials. So to me, it's front and center of how we address the climate change challenge. So Christian, do most companies want to adopt a circular economy in fear of losing profit?
Clearly, yes. That's the short answer. And in long, let me explain. Our customers are free in their purchasing decision, right? And more consumers take their decision for buying a certain product just based on sustainability criteria, and not only the price. And that's why any company not following or not introducing any circular economy solutions at all will have a disadvantage, and in the end face, of course, a revenue disadvantage. On the other hand, while we are still in the transition phase, for some companies it can be really an advantage. That means if you are implementing circular economy fast, you will have a good reason keeping your price maybe a bit higher and just making sure that your customers prefer you over your competition.
Let's also focus a bit on the progress we have made with implementing the circular economy. And as the world, as a global society, we're currently at a circularity level of 7%. In Europe, we're at an average of 12% with a maximum of 30%. And with what I described earlier, like let's say the dream state of where we want to be, of course, 30%, 12%, 7%, that's all far away from that. So I keep on getting back to the circularity gap. And Darren, I would be intrigued to know, do you think a full circularity to 100% is even feasible?
No. I don't mean to be so blunt with that, Hannah, when I say no, but I think we need to be practical, right? Realistically, if you shoot for the stars, you reach the moon, and that's what we need to bear in mind here. By definition, if we had a 100% level of circularity, we would never be extracting anything ever. And whilst that would be a utopia, of course it would. I think we need to be practical about where we're trying to go with this. I think also it depends of where you're measuring that as well. So the percentage that can be achieved depends of where you're drawing those boundaries. So if you're talking within, say, a master plan development, to have a circularity gap of 100% means you need all of those collection systems, you need all of those reprocessing systems, you need all of those technologies, all within that very small space. That just wouldn't be practical and feasible. Yeah, if you're drawing that boundary in terms of the world, then that world economy and that world trading, then it's a lot more feasible to have a higher level of circularity because you're then benefiting and using from those different industries around the world, reprocessing in the right place, collection systems in the right place, so on and so on. So I think it's about where you actually draw the boundaries. So to me, yeah, 7%, we've got a long way to go for sure. That's not nowhere near high enough, but 100%, no, unlikely. So Christian, I'm guessing industries are at different states in terms of their adoption of circularity. Which industries are the most advanced?
Well, I talked about the free choice of the consumer, right? And that is a reason why industries which are naturally very close to the customer, to the end consumer, are the ones most advanced in circular economy. Just take fashion, for example. There you can clearly distinguish, you can show examples of recycled materials in the textiles you are selling. And these companies have seen that it's just a selling argument, and that's why they are quite advanced. On the other hand, there are industries in the B2B area, business to business. And they actually have also implemented quite good solutions in the past, but they are not making them visible yet. So think of a company using green steel for their machines. This is a clear advantage, a clear decarbonization advantage for the world. But what they could do is they could just market that to their customers as well.
Europe is held as a leader in circular economy. Can you give me some examples of good practice, best practice?
Europe has indeed done a lot on circular economy. On the one hand side, regulation has done its part. We, for example, have the end-of-life directive, which is making sure that a lot of materials in the automotive sector need to go back, need to be recycled or reused. And we also have a directive on plastics recycling, giving very clear targets to all the players all along the value chain. But it's not only the regulation playing its part, and actually it would be sad if we would only need regulation to make it happen. We also see in Europe quite a bit of demand from consumer side really switching to circular economy solutions. So there is really a market pull at the moment, and again, an advantage for companies who are doing so.
Hannah, you've got a lot of experience in the industrial space. Where can industrial manufacturing start on a circular economy?
So I think there's two main ways to start. First of all, any industry manufacturer needs to set his or her vision for the circular economy. And that means by really integrating circularity into the design of the products, into the entire business model, and think of all of the aspects from repair, reuse, remanufacturing to recycling. So all of that brought together really to an end vision. And of course, this vision is something that is not going to be implemented in the next 1 or 2 years, but might also take a longer time. So that's, on the other hand, why it's also key to identify lighthouses that are implementable on a shorter notice, or pilots. And that could be anything and really ranges from industry to industry. For industry manufacturers, it's very often a lot about recycling, replacing primary materials, for example, primary aluminum with secondary aluminum, recycled aluminum, same for copper, steel, and so on. Or, just to name another example, by opening up a second life platform, for example, for used machines. That's also a really good example.
So, Christian, one of the main drivers in a circular economy is research and development. Are there more functions involved to transit to a circular economy?
Well, first of all, circular economy is team play. It's team play all over the place, and that means that every function in a company needs to play its part and needs to fulfill certain criteria. Be it marketing, who needs to identify the need on the consumer side and then translate that into a business need, or be it any other function in a company. If you force me, Darren, to mention a number 2 behind R&D, then I would say it's procurement, because they make the supply happen. If you need green materials, somebody needs to make sure you have the quantities you need, and this is the task of procurement departments.
We talk about closing the loop in delivering the circular economy. What do we need to do to achieve this?
I would love to say that it's easy, but actually it's not. We need to redesign and change everything. We need to rethink about the design and specification of products. We need to rethink ownership models, and we also need to change material flows end to end all along the value chain. And that's probably the question, or the big task we really have. How do we make this happen? And because there are so many players along the value chain who need to work together, and this facilitation of collaboration along the value chain, but maybe even sometimes between competitors, that's the thing we need to change. And it's a hard task, I guess.
So Christian talked a lot about collaboration now, and it's a really tough challenge ahead, and it is. And I don't want to make it sound worse, but it's not just about changing behavior, but we also, if we want to achieve the circular economy, we need to radically rethink our current existing business models. And Darren, I know you were talking about adopting business models before. What do we actually mean by circular business models?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Hannah. And I think there's many examples of this, depending on different sectors, different industries, different businesses. to me, a good example is around changing a business model is moving from a product-based to a service-based business model. So what do I mean by that? If we think about a light bulb, for example, it produces light. We don't actually want the light bulb. We don't want the glass and the metal and the hazardous materials contained within it. We just want the light. So we think about a car and mobility. We want to get from A to B in a quick, easy, convenient way. We don't want the metal and the tires and all of the waste of what to do with that asset at the end of it. So it's around thinking, how can businesses generate revenue through service, so like through rental or subscription-based models where they hold on to the asset and then design for longevity because they know they're not making revenue to sell as many as possible as quick as possible, that they know it's going to come back their way at some point, so they design it to last, maintain it, repair it, etc., in order to keep it as long as possible. And the outcome of that is then less waste. Everybody's happy. The customer then has still the same service, the same desire. They have the light, they have the mobility solution. What they don't have is the waste associated with it. So that's probably the best example I would give to that. So Hannah, we've said what a circular economy is. We've said why we need it. We've also said the circularity gap is quite high and that the level of circularity is quite low. What's some of the challenges?
I think there are some very specific challenges from industry to industry. Might be technical challenges, for example, or regulatory challenges and so on. But I think there's one overarching challenge across industries, and that is an ecosystem collaboration challenge. We are so used to solving problems and challenges by ourselves, which means companies need to try to, or want to try to solve the circular economy by themselves. And this is not possible. You need to collaborate with your value chain, with your customers and your suppliers. You need to collaborate within your industries, meaning with your competitors, which is a really, really hard challenge for most companies. And you need to collaborate outside your industries. There's a lot of new players you need to get involved. And last but not least, you also obviously clearly need to state what you need from the regulatory side in order to become more circular. And that in itself, this collaboration is a huge increase in complexity and also kind of explains why a lot of companies still shy away from the transition from a linear to a circular model.
So Christian, building on from what Hannah's kind of set out there, what do companies wish for from the regulatory authorities?
It's Christmas time, so let's make wishes, of course. So I think they have two wishes. Number one, planning reliability. And number two, it's fair competition. And why is that? Number one, planning reliability. Companies just want to know what is happening in terms of regulation, for example, in the upcoming years. They want to know what are the targets for CO2 reduction. They want to know what are certain shares of plastics recycling which they have to fulfill so that they can prepare for it, because it requires often big investments. And the other thing about making sure that we have fair competition, that's particularly important when companies make regulation just for a single country or, for example, for the European Union. So you need to make sure that, taking the example of the ETS system in Europe, the emissions trading system, that this not only applies for companies in Europe, but that there is actually also regulation for the emissions coming in from outside and making sure that there's no disadvantage by the location you produce.
So Hannah, Christian, we've talked a lot today about a circular economy and some of the details around it. How would you summarize, as we close now this podcast, how would you summarize a circular economy?
I will keep it very short. For me, it's closing the loop to stay within the planetary boundaries.
Yeah, and to me, it is team play and collaboration.
Well, I'm going to close on there. To me, it's about adopting different behaviors. Hannah, Christian, thank you so much for a really interesting conversation today, clearly demonstrating your expertise in this area. I wish you both a good day, and thank you, listeners, for taking the time to listen to this podcast on circular economy.